So good morning and welcome to this Skarbek webinar interview with General Sir Michael Rose and Lieutenant General Sir Graeme Lamb. Today we're going to be discussing leadership in a crisis and the challenges of leading in persistent uncertainty. Both of you are in a sense products of an organisation that thrives in conflict, the nature which is enduring a violent contest between humans marked by friction, uncertainty, chaos, violence, danger and stress. Both gentlemen have an interest in history and its lessons, and when not reading it, they're helping to make it. Sir Michael commanded the Special Air Service during the Iranian Embassy siege and the Falklands War. He went on to command UN peacekeeping forces in Bosnia in 1992 in a civil war that had cost 140,000 deaths. Sir Graeme Lamb was also a former director of UK Special Forces. He was deputy commander to US General David Petraeus in Iraq and key advisor to General Stan McChrystal in Afghanistan. Thank you both for joining me this morning. Both of you have weathered more than your fair share of crises. What did you learn from your crisis experience about the challenge of leading organizations, your people, and about yourself?
I think it was Albert Einstein that once said, always asked the question, if you had 60 minutes to save the world, what would you do? And his answer is informative. He said he would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and then 5 minutes finding a solution. Mine, and I'm sure General Michael's experience of life is that we spend most of our time finding people spending 59 minutes trying to find a solution and then the last minute blaming everyone else. But defining the problem is really important, and you have to define the crisis. You know, the word, it just slips off the tongue with ease. People feel very comfortable. Oh, you're talking about crisis. I understand the crisis. I've had lots of crises. I've dealt with it. Actually, the truth is the best and most accurate capture of what I think this crisis is, and therefore an understanding, defining a crisis, was from a fellow called Thomas Schelling. Schelling said of a crisis simply this. He says the danger had to be real, tangible, visceral, really, really real. Not just a sort of inconvenient difficulty, but real danger. COVID-19, definitely real, definitely dangerous, and actually, in fact, has already killed some number of hundreds of thousands of people, and possibly more. We just don't know the baseline of the figures. The second, on his point about crisis, was its unpredictability, and therefore your difficulty in trying to manage it. And the third finding from Schelling on crisis was that the participants are not fully in control. And so you end up with these three component parts. And with COVID-19, no rule or frame in which to be able to turn around and say, we know how to deal with this, because we don't know. So understanding and defining this crisis is really important. This is not like a crisis most people have dealt with. This, at the moment, is an unending story. We don't know when the time clock stops, and we have got containment, classification, control, and understand the cause. Now, it's for myself and the likes of General Michael, an area which we as soldiers have dealt with, because we would find ourselves in circumstances which were truly unpredictable, extraordinarily dangerous, unknown timelines as to when it would finish and how it would come through, and we absolutely were never fully in control of all the events that were unfolding upon us.
Graeme, what I think you're actually saying is that the psychological demands and pressures and the mechanisms for dealing with a crisis, whether you're dealing with COVID-19 or dealing with military crisis or indeed any other kind of crisis, are actually common and remain throughout history much the same. In 1994, I was sent out to be the head of the United Nations Protection Force in Bosnia at the time when there was a three-sided civil war going on there. And I discovered that in Bosnia at that time was a failing mission. The Secretary General, Boutros Ghali, was about to withdraw the mission. The two contributing nations were about to pull their troops out. And the reason was that the costs and the casualties that the peacekeepers, 23,500 of them at the time, were incurring, weren't in any way justified by the benefits of having the peacekeepers in that country. And yet, there were 2.7 million people in that country who caught up in a three-sided civil war, who were completely dependent on the delivery of humanitarian aid by the United Nations for their very survival. So I went to see Kofi Annan, who was the head of the peacekeeping department of the United Nations in New York, and said to him, there is no clarity to this mission. Morale is bad amongst the peacekeepers. And the reason is there is not a clear mission statement. There is no campaign plan. And what has happened over the months is that in response to succeeding crises in Bosnia, the United Nations have passed a number of Security Council resolutions which make no sense anymore. They're often conflicting, and the resources which the peacekeepers have to try and fulfill the obligations of those resolutions just aren't there. So what we did is we sat down in New York with a number of the troop continuing nations and redefined the mission, which was quite simple, really, when you look through all the miasma of what had happened. And that was, it was to deliver or facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid to the people who needed it. It was to try and create the conditions in which there could be some peaceful resolution of that problem. And there was, the third one was to stop the war spreading from the borders of Bosnia. So armed with this new definition of the mission statement, I was able to produce a clear set of orders for the United Nations peacekeepers, connect the resources we had with the job that had to be done. And in no time at all, we started to deliver. Morale went up and things started to happen. But I think the pressures and the demands on the individual leaders, whether they be junior or me at the top, were the same. It was dealing with a fast-moving crisis where there were many setbacks, where we sometimes seemed to be not in command of what was happening around us, but nevertheless we all knew the job that had to be done, and we all knew it was a valuable task that we were fulfilling.
I think you bring out a brilliant point, which is, you know, it's not the strongest or the most intelligent species, it's the species that adapts. And what you have just articulated from a practical, pragmatic piece of history was that, in fact, that it was the adaptation of a set of circumstances in crisis that actually, in fact, therefore led you and took you on a path out and through of the immediate, what I call overwhelming uncertainty.
We were able to come up with a clear set of objectives which resonated with the people who were on the ground trying to do the job. And as I started off by saying, we actually had a very good team of people who all had volunteered to go to Bosnia to be peacekeepers and wanted to do a good job. It was the muddle that was occurring around them, and which were being interpreted all the time as major setbacks. But actually, there was a way through it, which we could see.
You've also experienced, Graeme, that sort of close collective teamwork. But what were your own personal takeaways from leading in a crisis?
There are 10 ways, take any hill. The truth is that you just have to, in fact, ensure that you are looking at the circumstances that are presented, work out what you can do, know what you can't do. So be quite stoic about your approach. Don't rush to failure. And most importantly, then discuss with your immediate team where you are and the circumstances as you see them. The truth of the matter is that if you're overly focused on the crisis, you will not, as a leader, be doing your job, which is setting the conditions and the confidence in your own organization to take you to the next step, which is when you come through it. If you try and put it together when you're on the other side of it, or as it begins to unfold, you are, in fact, you'll be commercially disadvantaged, but most importantly for an organization, you may well find yourself already broken by that point.
Now, Graeme, you've talked about this notion of persistent uncertainty, and that the pandemic at the moment is a crisis the likes of which we've not experienced in the current generation, in most people's living memories. But even now, as we see a glimmer of light in flattening the curve and starting to unlock the lockdown, we've got a global economic recession in hot pursuit. You've described that situation where crisis follows crisis in a bit of a rolling mall as this persistent uncertainty. What are the characteristics of this persistent uncertainty and change?
Far better people will turn around and say, no, I've got a far better way of looking at crisis. I can measure it in different ways. I've got a far more behavioural, scientific sort of. But my view is that Schelling's worked as good as I've seen it. And so you might say, for me, if I look at this particular crisis, then I just apply the Thomas Schelling test. Simply this, is it dangerous? Really dangerous? Is it, in fact, unpredictable? And are we, or not, in full control of the events as they unfold? And if the answer to the first is it is very dangerous, the second is that, in fact, it remains unpredictable, and third, you are not in control, then we're not through this crisis. So this crisis is unbound at the moment by time, number one. Number two, the truth is we don't understand the rules of this damn virus's game. And so people are looking for, we need to sort out the economy. We need our business back online. You say we need to do all that because that's the other side, as I said, about great leadership, being able to address that forward throw. Right now, this damn thing hasn't gone away. And so the crisis has to be kept clearly and aggressively in focus. Over.
So, Graeme, what do you think the lessons of what you just said are, or the deductions that the leaders of industry and commerce and business should be, or indeed people within the National Health Service and in government should be thinking about, given what you just said, which I think no one would disagree with at all?
Yeah, and the answer, the number one, that great line from Franklin Roosevelt, the greatest fear is a fear itself. And so we mustn't become fearful to a point that we become inactive, that we don't do anything with the knowledge and the circumstances we find ourselves. The world is dangerous. It always has been. But we should not be, in fact, what I call consumed by the fear of this. And this is where I myself and the news media separate our ways here, because they will look at the immediate moment and ask the question rather than understanding the context and possibly, in fact, therefore, the outcomes as they're presented. If you take something like the Nightingale, the NHS Nightingale, everybody's now saying, well, we haven't really used them, so that was a lot of money. Was it really worth? You say, stop. What Nightingale has done and what it does today, and our increasing knowledge about this virus, it allows the government and the NHS to take risks. The NHS can get back to being the NHS, which is dealing with all the other things which they've had to park or pause on, people with dialysis, people with cancer treatments, all the rest of these things, which will kill them, and bring that back into balance, while at the same time, the government can take risks with lockdown. So in many ways, I think the understanding of how these things roll out, to go back to Paul's comment about this rolling sort of what I call regime of a crisis here, means that where you started from adapts and adjusts as you go through it. You and I know that only too well from our military service.
I mean, I think what you're saying is, people trying to run a business today, whether it's a big business or a small business, have got to be continually thinking and preparing for the unexpected. What are the contingencies that may arise, and how can I mean, some of the things are becoming clear quite early on, and that is, for example, structure within organizations is bound to be flatter than it used to be. There's going to be more work from home, less people moving around. That places different demands on leadership. You have to have greater trust in the teams that you've got working now in a more isolated way. And the first step I would do if I was a CEO, I would review the people I've got working for me and say, are these people capable of working in an isolated way? Are they people capable of responding to the unexpected? Are they people who have the confidence to take risks and to be agile and creative in facing the new world that we all have to face today? They would be the first practical steps I would be looking at.
I just wanted to explore that a little bit more with both of you. The crisis started with a risk, the risk that we'd be hit with a pandemic. It was the top risk on the UK's risk register for many years. That risk, with its associated probability and impact, became a reality this year. But as we navigate this persistent uncertainty, surely there are going to be lots of other risks, both downsides and upsides. and opportunities are going to arise at every level, from national power bases to small to medium enterprises who will see and seize business opportunities. To what extent do both of you think that we may need to adjust our appetites for risk?
I think on risk, it's quite interesting. So in these circumstances where you have the uncertainty, persistent uncertainty, actually what you need to do is you need to reevaluate your risk appetite. You need to then recognize what it takes to allow people to risk for you and the relationship you have with them to allow that to take place. So you're now into, in fact, empowered execution. You're now into something which, in fact, allows you to push out authorities which you might have been uncomfortable with, or you certainly may not have done before, but are necessary because of the way we're having to work virtually, or because of, in fact, the feeding opportunities that are presented. But I think we absolutely need to improve our understanding and the manner in which we risk, but never gamble.
What I've noticed over the last 20 or 30 years, basically since I left the military, is that risk, not only within the military but elsewhere, has become, the risk management has become a responsibility of a third party, not the individual who's actually trying to do the job. In the old days, the section commander had risk built into his tactical awareness. If he wanted to do a right flanking attack and put his machine gun on the left to cover them, he made sure himself that the platoon, when they advanced, or the section when they advanced, did not run into the line of fire of the machine gun that he placed. It was instinctive to him. My view is that we're going to have to go back to allowing the guy who's doing the job to have built into him his own risk assessment program. He's got to be thinking of risk all the time. And I'll give you an example from the Iranian Embassy siege. Right at the end of the Iranian Embassy siege, just after the police had handed the mission over from what was a police home office operation to a military operation, and I had briefed the squadron commander that he was now to launch the operation to rescue the hostages and to capture the terrorists. And about a minute after that, the Home Office and the police came back to me and said, look, there's been another possible démarche on the diplomatic side. Could you now stop what you're doing and hand it back to us? I said, no, I absolutely will not do that. The guys are on the move. They're ready to go. There is no way we can go into a sort of hats-on, hats-off situation where the risk of halting and then having to restart possibly the operation later on are too great. And so we're going to go ahead with it. And the police accepted that. But the guys on the ground would have expected me to come up with that kind of reply instinctively because they knew that I was thinking of them and what they had to do. I wasn't thinking of the wider, and I was prepared to take that risk.
Yes, I think that looking at risk now, we know that in past recessions and depressions, organizations have come out of it much better than others. And it's been those organizations that have tended to be more innovative, to take a risk, to do something in a different way, that have flourished where others have floundered. But that brings us to another interesting dynamic, which is we've seen organizations have got flatter, fewer layers, often in a desire to reduce bureaucracy, to increase empowerment, but also to cut costs. What dangers do you both see with this approach, and how does it square up now with an increased awareness and need for organizations and governments to be more resilient?
If you look at a military organization, our structures are inherently triangular. And the reason for that is because they're designed to take hardship. They're designed to fail and falter. They're designed to crash through and have people fall by the wayside, dead or wounded, whatever the case may be. And for the organization to maintain momentum, if not actually increase momentum as it goes through, to flatten structures so flat that they're now quite fragile. They're probably, in fact, too fragile for what is persistent uncertainty. You need to look at the individual of its leadership, the structure of the organization, and the team that make up that organization, and realize that you have to build in, rather uneconomically, some capacity for the unexpected, for the curveball, for the 20% margins that we always work with. Otherwise, when the unexpected arrives, there's nothing you can do about it other than take it on the chin and probably lose.
I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, the Centre of Army Leadership has just produced a new paper on leadership in a crisis, and that's one of the areas that they explore, where you have to have people who are able to work on their own. They know, they trust their leader. There's a feeling of loyalty and common purpose between them, and that gives an enormous amount of resilience. Because if the communications go down and things are moving very fast, you just don't have time to rethink and rebrief your team. They have to be able to do it on their own.
Thinking about this world of persistent uncertainty, what final words would you offer for leaders who right now are trying to implement their strategy whilst the strategy is, as it were, undergoing open heart surgery at the same time?
Well, my advice to a leader would be to, first of all, look at himself and make sure that he's capable of handling this new world where the old certainties have gone, and make sure that his team can as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if there was ever a time to sort of bring out the World War II banners, which we occasionally see stuck on sort of tea mugs, which is keep calm and carry on. Now's a good time to return to that form of thinking. What's really important for the leadership is that they must stand back. And when they've stood back, they've got to stand back even further to give themselves perspective. Because perspective will tell them roughly, vaguely, what the outcomes of COVID and the impacts and effects may be, and so how they need to reshape their business in numbers, in structure, in markets, all the rest of it that goes with it, yeah. And more importantly, how they need to therefore, in fact, manage their own people in a way which leads them through. The first thing you must do is be calm in crisis. And that is the absolute message, I would say, to the leadership of all these companies that are, in fact, facing really, really significant challenges right now.
Thank you. The challenges of leading through a crisis that is persistent will no doubt unfold this year and into the next. But for now, General Sir Michael Rose and General Sir Graeme Lamb, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us this morning, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future. Thank you.